Today is a special episode, if you will, of Practical Prayer. We're going to be talking about the Megillah and about Purim because Purim is coming up very soon. And I felt like it was really an important topic to cover so that you would be able to go into the Purim experience feeling very comfortable. Now, the word Megillah means scroll. So technically, a Torah is also a Megillah, although it's never referred to as that way, but technically it is. There are 5 books in the Tanakh that are called the 5 Megillot, the 5 scrolls, or Megillahs, depending on where you live, okay? The 5 Megillot are Shir HaShirim, which is Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, which is called in Hebrew Eicha, Kohelet, which is Ecclesiastes, and Esther. Now, these 5 scrolls were first grouped together in the Midrash Rabbah, which is an Aggadic Midrash, which was compiled on the Chumash, the Torah, and the 5 Megillot. A Midrash is a commentary which uses a very specific kind of interpretation technique, which seeks to delve into not just the words of the text, but also reads between the lines and often uses stories to bring out the hidden truths in a passage. And just so you know, although this has absolutely really very little to do with what we're talking about today, the Megillah, still I want you, I used a term and I want you to understand what that means. So Agadah is a compendium of rabbinic texts that incorporates folklore, historical anecdotes, moral exhortations, and practical advice in a wide variety of areas, from business to medicine. Now, in the Ashkenazi communities, all 5 scrolls are read on specific occasions throughout the course of the year. In many Sephardic communities, only the books of Esther and Lamentations are read as a special thing, okay? So in Ashkenazi communities, Shir HaShirim, in English, Song of Songs, are read on the Shabbat of Passover. And some Sephardi communities read it every Friday night at the onset of Shabbat. Others also read it at the end of the Passover Seder. The book of Ruth, or Rut, or Rus, depending again on where you live, is read in Ashkenazi communities before the reading of the Torah on the morning of Shavuot, while some read it during the night, which is devoted to study instead of sleep. I'm sure you're all familiar with the fact that most people in the Orthodox world anyway stay up all night on Shavuot learning Torah, okay? So Ruth, or Rus, or Ruth, is one of the things that are frequently studied during that time. The book of Eicha, or Lamentations, is read on Tisha B'Av, both in the evening and again in the morning, like the book of Esther is on Purim. And Kohelet, or Ecclesiastes, is read by many communities on the Shabbat of Sukkot. The book of Esther is read in all Jewish communities on the evening and morning of Purim. Now, generally speaking, though, even though all 5 of those books are called Megillot, are called the scrolls, and like I said, a Megillah is simply a scroll. It could be used to describe any scroll, but generally speaking, only the book of Esther is universally referred to as the Megillah. So if somebody says, are you going to hear the Megillah? They're referring to Esther on Purim, okay? Even though those other 4 books are also Megillot. All right. So now there's some halachas that you need to know before we actually look at the Megillah. And we're not going to read through the text because you can do that yourself. But there are some halachas about the reading of the book of Esther that you should know. So a person is, according to the Shulchan Aruch, which is the code of Jewish law and from which we get most of our halachas, a person is obligated to hear the reading of the Megillah once at night and again the next day. Now, part of the reason for this is that the mitzvah to hear the reading of the Megillah requires that it be read from a kosher scroll and that you hear every word read correctly. So we do it in the evening and then again in the morning to make sure that you have heard all of the words done correctly from a kosher scroll. If you have listened to it twice and it kind of raises the chances that every word that you heard every word, and that every word that you heard was properly done. Okay, so men, women, and children who have reached the age of education, which is a debatable kind of not completely objective age. Some say 3, but most say 6, are required to hear the Megillah. All right? The Megillah is so important that even Torah study is deferred in order to hear the reading. All right? The Megillah, like I said, is read twice, first at night and again during the day. The time for night reading is any time from nightfall, Tzeit HaKochavim, or the time when you can see 3 stars, until dawn, Alot HaShachar. So it doesn't matter how late. If you missed a reading, if you can find a kosher reading, then it doesn't matter how late, as long as it hasn't become dawn yet, you're fine. You don't need to, you can hear the evening reading. Some authorities permit, even in the case of a mild illness, to read the Megillah 1¼ hours before nightfall. So for example, if the only time that someone can come and read to you from a kosher scroll would be before sunset, they give a little bit of leeway because it's so important to hear the Megillah read. Now, the time for the daytime reading is anytime from sunrise to sunset. Post facto, the daytime reading may be read even after sunset, as long as the reading is concluded before Tzeit HaKochavim, or nightfall, okay? So if it's done after sunset, then we don't say it with any of the blessings. Now, because of the concept of Berov Am Hadrat Melech, which means with the multitude of the nation is the king honored, that comes from Proverbs or Mishlei, chapter 14, verse 28, it's preferable to hear the Megillah read at a synagogue with a large number of people. Kind of the origin of the phrase, the more the merrier, right? So so it's preferable to go to a big reading if you can over a small one. But if it's difficult for you to properly hear, or you have other reasons why going to a big one would be difficult for you or uncomfortable, then of course you are permitted, and it's even preferable to go to the smaller synagogue, especially if the big one is just impossible for you to hear, because remember, the mitzvah is to hear the reading of the Megillah. All right? So immediately before the blessings are recited, and we'll look at those blessings in just a minute, but there are blessings that are recited before we read from the Megillah. And it's interesting because we make blessings before we read from the Megillah, and we make blessings before we read Eicha, which is Lamentations, which is on Tisha B'Av, but there are no blessings specific to reading the other 3 Megillot. All right. So immediately before those blessings are recited, though, an announcement is made that the reader has in mind to fulfill the congregation's obligation, and likewise that they should have in mind to have their obligation fulfilled. So just before the blessings, when you hear this pronouncement made, I mean, it's going to be in Hebrew, so you may or may not actually understand it, but certainly by the blessings, you should have in mind that you are fulfilling your obligation to hear the reading through the reader who is about to read for you. Okay. Those listening to the Megillah can sit throughout, though, first of all, we do stand usually for the blessings, and then we sit down, and the Baal Koreh, or the person who's actually reading the Megillah, is supposed to stand. In private, though, the Baal Koreh can read either standing or sitting. So it has to do with a public setting that the person reading from the Megillah is standing. In a more private setting, then he can sit or stand. So, and it's totally acceptable. You do not have to have a minyan, which is really interesting. You don't have to have a minyan in order to have the Megillah read and in order to fulfill your obligation to hear it. However, you do have to hear it, again, like I said before, from a scroll that is kosher, and every word has to be read from it out loud. So sitting at home with a Tanakh on your lap, reading it from the book, actually doesn't count to fulfill your obligation to read the book. Sorry. The Megillah is called an Igeret, a letter, and it's folded up open before being read. It's not that long, so they can, unlike with a Torah scroll, they can actually open the whole thing and then they fold it a certain way and whatever. Okay. Now, there are 3 blessings that we say before reading. Right? Now, I'm going to actually show you, I'm going to stop for a second and show you something. This is a Art Scroll interlinear Megillah. And it's preferable, if you have time to procure one, it would be preferable for you to find one to bring with you to the synagogue. Now, you don't have to have an interlinear one like this, and you certainly can bring a Tanakh and follow along in a Tanakh. But I highly recommend that you get this or another one, it doesn't have to be exactly like this, with the English, so that you, first of all, this has all of the blessings in it. It also has some of the verses that we say out loud together, which I'm going to point out to you, but it has them bolded, so it's obvious to you what's going on. And it's just really much easier to follow along and to know what's going on if you have a separate Megillah to take with you when you go to the synagogue to hear the reading. Okay, I really, really, really like the Art Scroll one. And so if you have time to procure one before Purim, I highly recommend that you do it, either ordering it or going into a Jewish bookstore if you have one nearby. Now, if you have one and if you're following with me, if you have one but you're not following with me and you're watching by recording, I recommend that you stop and go get one so that you can follow along. Unfortunately, those who are watching with me live are maybe going to have to go back and replay it. But anyway, so get your Megillah and open it up. In the Art Scroll Megillah, the first handful of pages are an overview. But if you turn to the end of the overview, to the first page of the actual text, right? It's page 1. And it says, blessings before the reading of the Megillah. Okay, so there are 3 blessings that are said before the reading of the Megillah. One is referred to by the last 3 words, Al Mikra Megillah. The second one is She'asa Nisim, which is the blessing that we make only on Hanukkah and Purim. And the third one is Shehechianu, which is a blessing that we make at the beginning of every holiday. Okay, now if you are in a synagogue where they make the blessing Shechianu both at night and during the day, you should have in mind that the first Shechianu is for the holiday, and the second Shechianu is for all of the cool stuff that's going to be going on during the day, the next day. In some shuls, people will dress up for both readings. Most places, people will only dress up for the daytime, but a lot of kids will dress up for the evening one as well, because there's also usually a lot of parties and things like that. Sometimes what I'll do is for the Friday night reading, I'll maybe put on a silly wig or something, and then, not Friday night, for the evening reading, I'll put on a silly wig or something, and then for the daytime reading, if I'm going to wear a costume, then I will, then I'll put on a whole costume. And you should also know that a lot of grown women in the observant community don't necessarily wear costumes. They'll just put on something like festive and silly and bright and colorful. And actually there's some who have a custom not to do that at all, but rather to dress like they would for a major Jewish holiday. So some women will not dress silly at all, but will dress very nicely in celebration of the holiday, which is a miracle, a miraculous. So there are 3 blessings that are recited before the beginning of the reading, and I'm going to share them with you now. If you have a Megillah, try to find them there at the very beginning. If you are following along in a Tanakh, the blessings are not going to be there. You would have to find the blessings in the actual Siddur, which is why I highly recommend just getting one Megillah that has all of that in it in one place so that you don't have to juggle 2 books. So the first blessing is Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al mikra Megillah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments, and has commanded us concerning the reading of the Megillah, or on the reading of the Megillah. Okay, so the reader says this blessing, and the congregation responds, Amen. The second blessing is Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam she'asa nisim lavotenu bayomim hahem bazman hazeh. Blessed are you, O Lord, our God, King of the universe, who wrought miracles for our forefathers in those days at this season. And then the congregation responds, Amen. And then the third one, which you should be familiar with, is the blessing, the Shechianu blessing that we make at the beginning of all holidays. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Blessed are you, O Lord, our God, King of the universe, who has kept us alive and sustained us and has brought us to this season. And we all say, Amen. Now, we only say Shechianu for a holiday once. So like I said a minute ago, have in mind that when you say the Shechianu, or when you're listening to the Shechianu, when you say Amen, the first time is for the holiday, and the second time is for the Suda, the special meal, or the Shalach Manot, the gifts that will be given and received during the course of the day, and of course all of the other celebrations. Now, you should also know that it is totally and completely permissible for a woman who is capable to read the Megillah. And there's a lot of different reasons why this is different from a Torah reading in a congregational setting. But it is totally permissible for a woman who is capable to read from the Megillah. And in many communities, especially in Israel, there are special women's readings of the Megillah where not just the audience is women, but the reader is as well a woman. And this is even done in Orthodox communities. So it is not completely a, feminist, non-Orthodox thing. There are many, many Orthodox communities, especially, like I said, in Israel, where there is a woman reader who will read the Megillah for women and children in attendance. And the reason for this is that women and men are equally obligated in the mitzvah, and there is no minyan required for the reading of the Megillah, unlike the reading of the Torah, which requires a minyan. So you can't, unless you're going to go so far as to say that women can count in a minyan, then you could say, okay, well, then women should be able to, read from the Torah. And I'm not getting into that at all. I am not addressing that topic whatsoever, but that's the reason that there's a difference between reading the Megillah and reading from the Torah in the Orthodox world. Okay, if a woman reads from the Megillah, the first blessing, instead of saying Al Mikra Megillah, on the reading of the Megillah, she says Lishmoa Mikra Megillah, who has commanded us to hear the reading of the Megillah. Because for a woman, it's not a mitzvah to read it, but it is a mitzvah and an equal obligation to hear it. And so the wording is just slightly different because the woman who is reading will not only be reading it for everybody else, but she'll also be reading it for herself. So in the reading out loud, she is hearing it and fulfilling her obligation to hear it, whereas in a minyan, the man who is reading it is fulfilling his obligation to read it as well. Okay. The blessings should be said standing, even when reading for an individual. If someone accidentally omitted the blessings, he still has fulfilled his obligation to hear the Megillah, okay? And just so you know that it's very common in Jewish communities to have people who have learned how to read the Megillah and who actually own their own kosher Megillah, who will do a mitzvah by going around to people's homes who maybe are housebound either because of their health or because of children at home or whatever reason. They will come and read the Megillah for people. And like I said, it doesn't require a minyan. So even if there is one person in a house who is housebound who needs to hear the Megillah, somebody who knows what they're doing and has a kosher scroll can come and read for that individual. And there has been more than one time where I was so busy in the morning getting ready for the activities of the day that I missed the main Megillah reading in our community. And so I found I put out thank God for social media, right? I put out a question asking if there was going to be another reading, and somebody told me that there was going to be a reading at a particular house because somebody had a brand new baby. And so I went over to that house and I went and heard the Megillah read there. Okay, so, and that's something that actually anybody who can learn to read Hebrew can do, and it's a wonderful mitzvah. So I would encourage you to think about maybe learning how to read from the Megillah and doing that as a mitzvah for other people. Okay, so as I said a minute ago, when the Shechianu blessing is said in the daytime, you should have in mind that it includes the mitzvah of giving charity, of giving gifts of food to friends, and the Purim meal or Suda. All right, the entire Megillah is supposed to be read, as I said, from a kosher scroll written with proper ink on parchment with the correct markings and all of that. And so someone who recites the Megillah from heart or from a book has not fulfilled his obligation. And this is also why it is important to, not just to go to congregation to hear it, but to have somebody come in and read it for you if you need to. Okay. There is a custom, which you are probably familiar with, to make noise at the mention of Haman or Haman's name, right? Pretty much everybody's familiar with that. So that's, of course, to comply with the command to wipe out the remembrance of Amalek, which is from Deuteronomy or Devarim, chapter 25, verses 17 through 19. So we're commanded by God to wipe out the remembrance of Amalek, and Haman is a descendant of Amalek. And so we kind of fulfill that obligation by booing and making all sorts of noise, and it's a lot of fun for the kids every time we hear the name Haman in the reading. All right, and there's a special noisemaker that you can twist around, and it makes this big sound, and it's called a grogger, and those are very common. But people use all sorts of noisemakers, rattles. They'll rattle their keys. Some people, I have an app on my cell phone that has noises that it can make every time you hear Haman. You press one of the buttons and it'll make a trumpet or a foghorn or a train horn or whatever. Okay. But because we are also obligated to hear every word that's being read, you will find that the reader will say Haman, right? And stop. And everybody's going to make all this noise because they just heard the name Haman, and they make noise and they make noise. And then once the noise dies down, the reader will repeat Haman again, because even though we're supposed to wipe it out, we still have to hear it because it's one of the words in the Megillah. So he'll say Haman again, and then he will continue. There are 4 verses which are read during the course of the reading that are considered verses of redemption. And these are verses which the congregation traditionally reads out loud. Since every word of the reading should be from a kosher Megillah, the reader repeats these verses after the congregation. Now, if you are not reading from a Megillah that's pre-printed and bolded, I highly recommend that you pause the video if you can. Go get some sticky notes or a pencil, and then come back, because we're going to go over the 4 verses. Now, I will tell you that I had been religious a long time before I stopped being caught off guard by the repeating or the reading out loud of these 4 verses. So there's 4 verses that are read out loud by the congregation during the course of the reading of the Megillah. The first one is referred to as Ish Yehudi, which actually just means a Jewish man. That's in chapter 2, verse 5. The second one is Mordechai Yatsa. That is in chapter 8, verse 15. The third one, which is actually the next verse, LeYehudim Hoita Ora, chapter 8, verse 16, which you will recognize is also the verse that we repeat during the recitation of Havdalah. And then the last one is actually the last verse of the book of Esther, Ki Mordechai HaYehudi, which is chapter 10, verse 3. Okay, so what I want you to do right now is turn to chapter 2. I'm going to turn to chapter 2 myself and find verse 5. Okay, now like I said, in the art school, you can see that it's bolded. I think that's it, right? Yeah, you can see that it's bolded. If you are using a book that does not have it bolded or underlined, or you're reading straight, you're following from the Tanakh, I highly recommend that you put a sticky note in your book, or you take a pencil and circle the verse number or put an arrow where it starts, so that you'll be able to find it, so that you'll notice it when you get there during the reading. Okay, now one of the things that I did for my class that I teach at the seminary, I will go ahead and post into the Facebook group the text transliterated of these 4 verses. And what you can do is you can print them out, you can cut them out, and you can paper clip them to the page, which is really good because not only does it give you the transliteration if you can't read from the Hebrew, but it also will give you, the paper clip will mark the place, so you'll be prepared. Okay, I just turned the page and there's the paper clip, so we're coming up on this verse. All right, so the verse in chapter 2, verse 5 says, Ish Yehudi haya b'Shushan habira ushmo Mordechai ben Yair ben Shimi ben Kish ben Yamini. A Jewish man was in Shushan, the capital, whose name was Mordechai, son of Yair, son of Shimi, son of Kish, a man of the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, so we say that out loud because Mordechai, of course, is kind of the hero, joint hero, heroine with Esther in the whole story. So that's Ish Yehudi. That is the first verse that we read out loud. The next verse that we read out loud is called Mordechai Yatsa, and that's chapter 8, verse 15. So turn now, if you can, to chapter 8, verse 15. And like I said, you'll want to mark this either with an arrow or a sticky note or a paper clip or something so that you know when we get there. Because even if you're using a book that has it bolded, it still may be one of those things where until people start talking, you won't even realize that it's coming, you're coming upon it. And that can be a little bit frustrating because it means that you're caught by surprise and then you don't have enough time to read it and whatever. Okay, so chapter 8, verse 15 and then verse 16 are right here. You can see in mine it's bolded, but most of the others are not bolded. And chapter 8, verse 15 says, Mordechai yatsa milfnei hamelech b'levush malchut techelet v'chor v'yateret zahav gedola v'tachrich butz v'argaman v'ha'ir Shushan sahala v'samecha. So it says, Mordechai left from the presence of the king, clad in royal apparel of blue and white, with a crown of gold that was large and a robe of fine linen and purple. And then the city of Shushan was cheerful and joyful. Okay, so that's the first one that we read out loud. Well, it's the second one, but the first one of the 2. And then the next verse says, Yehudim hoita ora v'simcha v'sasan v'yakar. Right? The Jews had light and joy and delight and honor. And that's the passage that we say, that we repeat out loud during the Havdalah ceremony as well. So you should have verse 15 and verse 16 circled, and that way, or with an arrow or a sticky note or something, so that you will know when you're coming upon it and you will know what to say. And then the last one is chapter 10. I almost passed it, just so that you know. Here in chapter 9, verses 8 and 9 and 10, part of 10, you find an interesting thing. You see this page and you see how there's this great big square empty space here. This is where the names of the 10 sons of Haman are said. Now, there's a halacha that those 10 names are supposed to be said in one breath. And so even though the reader can say it in one breath, he can't say it in one breath for you. So there are some congregations, but not all, that have the custom that the person who is listening also says the names under his breath in one breath at the same time as the reader is doing that. And like I said, not all do, but some do. Oh, one other thing that I forgot to mention that you might want to be aware of, that there are differing customs as to making noise during the saying of the name of Haman. In most Ashkenazi communities, the congregation makes noise during every mention of the name of Haman. However, it's been my observation that in some communities, especially Chabad, it may be this way in other Hasidic communities, I do not know, but they only make noise during the few times that Haman is followed by so here in chapter 8, chapter 8, verse 5, it says that they were going to rescind the letters of Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite. So it says in Hebrew, Haman ben Hammedatha ha'agagi. Okay, so it doesn't just say Haman, it says Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite. So in that case, in those congregations where they don't make noise during every time Haman is mentioned, in a case like this where he is called Ha'agagi or Ha'amadatha, that's when they will make noise. If you go to a Chabad shul and you know this to be the fact, or you think it might be the fact, it might be a good idea to go through your text and to circle all of the places where Haman is mentioned with a modifier rather than just Haman, so that you will be prepared and know not to make noise during any of the other Hamans, okay? But anyway, so we're on our way to chapter 10, verse 3, which is the last verse in the book, although, as you can see, it's certainly not the last page in the book because there are things that we say afterwards. However, this is the last verse of the book of Esther, and it says, Mordechai ha-Yehudi mishneh lemelech Achashverosh begadol leYehudim veratzui lerov achav deresh tov la'amo v'dover shalom lechol zaro. Mordechai the Jew was second in command to the king Achashverosh. He was a great man among the Jews and found favor with the multitude of his brethren. He sought the good of his people and spoke for the welfare of all his descendants. Okay, so that is the last verse, chapter 10, verse 3, and that is said by the congregation, and then it's repeated by the reader. And then after the Megillah reading, each member of the congregation recites the following blessings. So the blessings that we said at the beginning are said by the reader. The blessing here at the end is said by everybody, all right? And that blessing says, Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, the God, who takes up our grievances, judges our claims, avenges our vengeance, and who pays just retribution to all the enemies of our soul, and who exacts payment on our behalf from our foes. Blessed are you, Hashem, who exacts on behalf of his people Israel from all their foes, the God who brings salvation. Okay, so just one other point about the fact that this has to be read from a kosher scroll is that you're actually not supposed to, you can read along with your eyes, but you're not supposed to actually read along like under your breath from the book, because you have to make sure that you're hearing, okay? Also, you should know that it's forbidden between the blessings and the blessing at the end. You really shouldn't speak, okay? Because the blessings were made over the hearing, and so unless there's an emergency, don't talk until it's all over. All right, I already mentioned the 10 sons of Haman, and then after the Megillah reading, we say this blessing, and then depending on the custom of your community, after the night reading, there are things that are said, and after the daytime, there are different things that are said. But after both, there is a song called Shoshanat Yaakov or Shoshanas Yaakov that are said after both. Okay, and so that's it. The readings. Now, if you have a book, it has the readings for afterwards in the book. So you just have to follow what's in your book, and it's right there. Now, in this particular book, the Art Scroll one, it's really interesting that they actually include the grace after meals. The blessing after meals is in the back here. And in fact, that's the whole rest of the book, probably because the expectation is that you might take this with you to the holiday meal that you're going to celebrate during the day of Purim, right? So you come home from shul after hearing in the morning, and then you're going to have this fantastic meal, a suda, and you'll have it at somebody's house or at your own house, but you'll need something for benching. So that's that. All right, so I'm wondering if there are any questions about any of the things that we do on the Purim, on the holiday of Purim. I did not specifically cover the halachas, the rules about giving charity to the poor or giving gifts of food to our friends, because I figured that that was something that, you know, rather than being about prayer, that's really about halachas, and that's something that you ostensibly have learned from in your congregation, in your community. So, but just in case you haven't, you should know that in addition to the reading of the Megillah in the evening and in the morning, and in addition to the requirement to eat a special meal, a suda, there is also the requirement to give tzedakah, to give charity to the poor. And in many communities, they have a very special drive where they're collecting money specifically to help people buy matzah for Passover. So I've read that there are a lot of people who have a custom that whatever amount of money that they spend for making the shalach manot, the gifts that they're going to give to their friends, they are always careful to spend more on the tzedakah than they do on those gifts. So, for example, if I'm spending, let's say, 300 or 400 shekels, $100, to put together the gift baskets that I'm going to be giving to my friends, I will make sure to give at least $100 to charity. And in most communities, the rabbi is collecting money for the community in order to give to the poorest members so that they have money to buy things for Passover. So, so that there's that, and then there's the custom to give a gift of food. And, you know, and it's interesting because in the actual text of the Megillah, it calls it delicacies. So it's not supposed to be just simple foods. It's supposed to be something special. A lot of people go really out of their way. Unfortunately, a lot of people spend a lot of money on their food gifts. The halacha is that you only need to give one, and it should just simply include foods of 2 different brachot. So, for example, if you gave bread and wine, that would fulfill it. So you could do a loaf of challah and a bottle of wine all nicely wrapped up and give that to a friend, and you have fulfilled your obligation to send food delicacies, if you will, to a friend. You know, other people send junk food. Each year, a lot of people will do a theme. Last year I did Mexican. I made a homemade nacho sauce and sent tortilla chips and this nacho sauce and salsa and hot peppers to all of my friends that I was sending to. This year I'm actually sending a salad, but not pre-made. I'm sending the vegetables in a salad bowl. So anyhow, whatever. I hope that you have an absolutely amazing Purim, and I hope that you found this class helpful, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.